The lumen hum never fades in the induction vaults. It seeps into the bones until even silence vibrates. I remember the taste of metal on my tongue, the way recycled air burned cold in my lungs, and the weight of the data slate pressed into my palm, the decree of my own unmaking. I had dreamed of honor, of the Emperor's light blazing through me like the dawn over Terra's spires. Yet here, beneath the manufactorum's choking vents, honor felt more like imprisonment. They told us we would ascend, but the first thing they took was our names. I still hear the chant of the apothecaries echoing through the vox grills. Flesh is weakness. Faith is form. The words were meant to fortify, but to me they were a blade turned inward, carving away what was left of the boy I once was. Every heartbeat since has sounded like a hammer striking ceramite, steady, merciless, final. Transmit this account across the VoxNet so that the Emperor may judge its truth. Let every echo be a prayer for those who still remember the taste of their own humanity. The lumen hum has no beginning and no end. It's a sound that fills every breath, every thought, until it becomes indistinguishable from one's own heartbeat. When I first awoke beneath that pale glow, my skin slick with chem fluid and my veins burning with the first infusion of hypno-conditioning serum, I believed I had died and been interred in a mechanicus vault. The air reeked of iron and sterilant, a cloying mix that clung to the back of my throat. Around me, the silhouettes of other aspirants lay bound to their slabs, motionless except for the tremors that coursed through their limbs when the pain peaked. I tried to speak, to call out for someone, anyone, but the respirator mask sealed over my mouth hissed back like an animal denying its master. I had been told this was the first step toward glory. The apothecary's words had rung clear before the sedative took hold. To be remade is to be worthy. I remember his eyes behind the lenses, cold, efficient, devoid of cruelty, yet utterly empty of empathy. He might have been a servitor if not for the faint pulse in his throat. They opened me then, and though the anesthetics dulled sensation, I felt each shift of their tools as pressure deep within my chest. The first implant, the secondary heart, thudded to life beside my own, its rhythm alien, too fast, too precise. It was as though I now carried a stranger inside me. Time dissolved into fever dreams. I saw the Emperor's sigil carved into the ceiling above, its wings blackened by age and fumes. In my delirium it seemed to move, its gaze shifting from one aspirant to another, judging. The servitors sang in their monotone chants, machine voices reciting the same binary prayer for each soul on the slab. Some of the boys didn't wake again. I didn't know their names, our identities had been purged from the records the moment we were chosen, but I still remember the way the apothecaries marked their slabs with a drip of sealing wax and the faint scent of burnt incense. They called it purification. I called it an ending. When consciousness finally anchored itself again, I found I could no longer taste the air. The mask had been removed, but my tongue felt foreign. My senses dulled in strange places and heightened in others. I could hear the machinery through the walls, the endless hydraulics, the faint rasp of gears turning behind bulkheads. Each sound carried a different weight now, like my mind had been tuned to their frequency. A tech marine once told us later that the gene seed reconfigures the soul as much as the flesh. I think I understood then what he meant. My thoughts no longer felt entirely my own. They allowed us to stand after the third night. I stumbled, knees trembling, clutching at the cold rail of the chamber wall. Across from me, a boy I vaguely recognized, a miner's son from the hive outskirts, fell to the ground and did not rise. His breathing was shallow, erratic. The apothecary simply noted his vitals, then signaled a servitor to remove the body. There was no ceremony, no words. Only that mechanical hum filling the silence again. I wanted to rage. I wanted to scream that we were human beings, not components. But when I opened my mouth, what came out was a hoarse whisper, a rasp scraped raw by the respirator's passage. He was alive, I croaked. The apothecary didn't look at me. He was weak, he replied. Weakness is failure, and failure is a contagion. Then he pressed a rune on his data slate, and the lumen hum grew louder, drowning even the sound of my own breath. The nights were the worst, though the vault had no true night. The lights dimmed only slightly, cycling through pale tones meant to mimic rest hours. In those hours I dreamt of strange shapes in the dark, serpentine tendrils of light coiling around my limbs, whispering in binary tongue. Sometimes I awoke with blood on my sheets, small streaks from my nose or the corner of my mouth. My body was remapping itself, cell by cell, like an organic machine aligning to some divine blueprint. Pain became routine like hunger used to be. By the 10th day they began to speak to us again, not as men but as projects. The apothecary's assistant read from a litany before each procedure. Let the Emperor's design be pure. Let the clay submit. Let the vessel become strong. We repeated it until the words lost meaning. One aspirant refused once. They dragged him away. We never saw him again, though rumor spread that his remains were offered to the chapter's gene vault as a cautionary display. Whether true or not, it silenced us. Somewhere in those endless cycles I began to forget my own reflection. The mirrors in the hygiene stalls were covered with steel plates. They told us vanity was an impurity. Yet one night I caught sight of myself in a polished medici tray. My eyes glowed faintly in the lumen light, gold where they once had been brown. My skin bore surgical scars that pulsed faintly with bioluminescent serum beneath. I should have felt pride. Instead I felt estrangement. The boy who had entered this place was fading, replaced by something both magnificent and monstrous. There was one thing that anchored me. The sound. That endless droning hum of the lumen. It became a constant, a reminder that I was still inside the forge of rebirth. Every time doubt threatened to consume me, I focused on that vibration in the air. It steadied me, though I could not tell if it was comfort or surrender. It was on the eve of the os modula, graft, the stage that would elongate our bones and reconfigure our skeletons, that I truly understood. The phrase flesh unmade. The medica chamber glowed with sterile light, surgical arms folded like the wings of some mechanical angel. The apothecary's voice over the vox filled the chamber. Endure, aspirant. The Emperor remakes his chosen as he wills. Then came the searing fire through my spine, the feeling of my very frame twisting, bones groaning under unnatural growth. I tried to cry out, but no sound emerged. Only the hum, steady, endless, vibrating through the marrow. When I awoke, I was taller, stronger, and yet somehow smaller inside. The first thing I noticed when I awoke from the os modula procedure was not the pain, though pain was everywhere, nestled deep within every joint, crawling like wire through muscle and bone, but the absence of something I had lived with all my life. Warmth. My blood no longer felt like blood. It moved colder, thicker, as if replaced by liquid metal. My heartbeat had split into two distinct rhythms, one human and one mechanical, fighting for supremacy beneath my ribs. I pressed a trembling hand against my chest and felt both pulses at once, a syncopation that didn't belong in any living creature. The chamber around me was quiet save for the drip of saline from the IV and the faint click of servitor claws cleaning the floor. My cot was soaked through. My body had shed layers of skin during the night, an exuviae of the man I'd been. The scent of it was unbearable, a burnt organic tang that clung to the back of my throat. Across the room, a boy named Loran stirred and coughed, flecks of black fluid spilling from his lips. He didn't make it past the next hour. The apothecary marked the death without emotion, intoning another of his litanies to the machine god as the body was carried away. There were fewer of us now, fewer each day. It didn't matter how strong you were, how devout, how disciplined. The implants chose their vessels the way fire chooses which beams to leave standing. Those who burned too fast became ash. We were permitted to walk after the os modula took root. The corridors were long and narrow, lined with vox grills that whispered prayers of augmentation. The sound followed us everywhere, soft and low. Steel the mind, purge the weak, The lighting was harsh, casting everything in the same sterile blue-white. There was no place here for color, for the tones of life beyond the walls. Just gray steel, white light, and the crimson stains that came when one of us collapsed during march. At intervals we were fed, nutrient paste the texture of wax, dispensed from machines. It had no taste, but it filled the emptiness. Hunger became another measure of time. Between feedings we were injected with more serums. Some induced visions, bright shapes against the darkness, voices that were not ours whispering fragments of scripture. Others caused seizures or a kind of slow, numbing paralysis that the apothecaries called alignment. Alignment of the will to the gene seed's intent, they said. I wondered if the Emperor could feel us crying out inside our skulls, or if his gaze was turned elsewhere, fixed upon more worthy sons. Once during the night cycle I heard someone sobbing quietly in the bunk beside mine. The sound was muffled by the hum of machinery, but it was unmistakable, human, fragile. I didn't look. I didn't speak. To acknowledge it was to share it, and shared weakness was a death sentence. Instead, I listened until the sobs dissolved into a gurgling cough, then silence. The next morning, the bunk was empty. The transformations continued. I could feel the black carapace growing beneath my skin, the lattice of neural ports spreading like roots through my nervous system. When I moved, faint ripples of pain accompanied each flex of muscle, yet I began to notice something else too, a growing sense of detachment. Pain no longer dominated my awareness. It was as if my mind had been dulled against it, or perhaps elevated beyond it. I couldn't tell which. We began the hypno-indoctrinations after the 12th implantation. The process was simple. Lie flat on a slab, eyes fixed on the lumen above, while the chaplain's voice thundered through the vox. The words weren't meant to be understood so much as absorbed, the way stone absorbs heat. He spoke of duty, of the Emperor's vision, of the sacred order of death and obedience. The phrases nested in my thoughts like seeds, sprouting without consent. I began to dream of battlefields I had never seen, of war banners fluttering above worlds whose names I didn't know. Sometimes, between sessions, we caught glimpses of the fully initiated Astartes, the giants we aspired to become. They strode through the upper corridors armored in gleaming ceramite, their every movement deliberate and weighty. Their presence changed the air, bent it around them. We dared not meet their gaze. To do so was to feel like an insect observing a storm. One of them paused once near where we stood. I remember his helm turning toward me, the reflection of the lumen flickering across the golden trim of his pauldron. "Endure," he said simply, his voice like the grinding of tectonic plates. Then he moved on, leaving behind only the echo of that single word. That night, I repeated it to myself as they implanted the secondary lungs. Endure. The pain was blinding, a cold fire spreading through my chest as my body fought the foreign organs. I wanted to resist, but there was no strength left for rebellion. So I endured, and when the pain receded, replaced by a strange new capacity to breathe through poison, I realized something terrible. I was beginning to understand. The process wasn't only to make us stronger, it was to make us obedient. The body obeyed because it was reshaped to. The mind followed because resistance had nowhere left to live. When sleep came, I dreamt again of the hum. Louder now. I could feel it pulsing through the walls, through the marrow of my altered bones. Sometimes it took form, an image of the Emperor's visage, radiant and severe. Other times it became the sound of waves breaking against metal shores. In those dreams I would walk across fields of white ash, the horizon split by a golden light that never drew nearer. I would call out, and the wind would answer in binary, "You are becoming what you must be." I awoke each time drenched in sweat, my heart, both hearts, hammering. And I would wonder, in those few fragile seconds before the Medikey alarm signaled another round of implants, whether the voice was his or the gene seed itself, whispering its own will into mine. The next phase would begin soon. The hemastomen, the Larraman's organ, the catalepsian node. The apothecaries moved with increasing urgency, their data slates flashing with incomprehensible codes. They said the chapter needed warriors faster than before, that the tides of war demanded haste. I didn't know what war. I only knew that the lumen hum was growing louder, and somewhere deep in that sound I thought I heard my old name echo once, faint and fading, before it was gone forever. They told us the hemastamen would grant us vigor beyond mortal measure, that our blood would sing with oxygen and fire. What they didn't say was how it would feel to burn from the inside out. The serum was thick and dark as promethium, and when it hit my veins I thought I could taste the copper of my own heart. The world blurred, the walls bending inward, and for a moment I felt as though my body were too small to contain itself. Then the convulsions began. I remember clenching my fists so tightly my nails drew blood, though the pain was dull now, distant. My mind detached, floating somewhere above the convulsions. The apothecaries moved efficiently, their voices overlapping in a cold litany of observation. Subject stable, heart rhythm with intolerance, Laraman response forming. Every word felt like a hammer driving another nail into the coffin of my humanity. When I came to, my arms were scarred by fresh needle tracks, and my tongue felt thick, my throat dry. The boy in the next cot was dead again, another one gone. The servitors had yet to clear him. His face was frozen mid-scream, and for the first time since I entered the vault I reached out to touch another living, or once living being. His skin was still warm. The warmth vanished beneath my fingers, and I realized I was colder than the corpse. The apothecary noticed and turned. "Remove your hand," he said softly, almost kindly. "The Emperor's work continues in him no longer. Focus on your own transformation." That word, transformation, lingered in my skull. It made what we endured sound deliberate, even merciful. But there was no mercy here. There was only process. As the days merged into cycles, I began to feel the changes in my blood. Cuts no longer bled freely. Bruises faded before I could recall where they'd come from. The Medicae told us we were healing faster than the human body was meant to. "The Laraman's organ has taken root," one said, her Vox voice flat and metallic. "You are becoming efficient. Efficient. Not whole, not better. Just more useful." One night, when the rest of the chamber slept, I couldn't. I stood before the sealed viewport that looked out into the manufactorum's depths. Below, the world was a labyrinth of cranes, furnaces, and conveyor lines, all glowing with that same white-blue fire. Servitors trudged in lines, their limbs fused with tools, their mouths sealed by rusted grills. Watching them, I felt an ache that wasn't physical, a premonition that perhaps the distance between them and us was shrinking, that we too were becoming extensions of the same will, flesh-shaped to serve. Loran's cot was empty again. Others were too. I stopped counting after 32. There was no mourning here, no space for grief. The chaplain reminded us daily that sorrow was a form of self-indulgence. "To weep is to deny his design," he said, pacing between our rows like a shadow of black ceramite in scripture. "Your tears would drown the light he placed within you." Yet even as I tried to absorb his words, part of me recoiled. Wasn't the Emperor human once? Didn't he know sorrow? Or had he too burned it away along with everything else that tethered him to us? The implantations continued. Each one stripped something intangible. The catalepsian node rewired our sleep, what little of it we had, until rest became optional. I stopped dreaming. At least I think I did. The hours blurred, so I no longer knew when I was awake. Sometimes I'd close my eyes and open them again to find myself in a different room, surrounded by different faces. One boy whispered to me during ration time that the indoctrination worked while we thought we slept, that the chaplains murmured commands into our subconscious until faith replaced fear. He said it with such conviction that I almost believed him. 2 days later, he vanished. By then, my reflection had grown unfamiliar. The contours of my face had sharpened, my jaw heavier, my eyes brighter with that gold-tinged luminescence that marked a successful adaptation. My voice, when I spoke, carried deeper resonance. I tested it once, speaking aloud in the isolation cell. Who am I? The echo came back a stranger's voice. We were given our first rites of motion soon after. March drills in the sub-hall beneath the vault. Barefoot, naked but for sensor straps and surgical scars. We moved in unison, an army of silhouettes lit by the pulsing lumen overhead. Each stomp of foot on steel floor echoed like a hammer beat through the chamber. Again, the chaplain thundered. Move as one! You are no longer men. You are the Emperor's breath-made form. His voice vibrated through my ribs until I could no longer tell where his command ended and my body began. During one of those drills, a recruit stumbled. His legs spasmed, muscles rebelling against the new bone structure. The apothecary didn't even pause before signaling a servitor. The boy was carried away, twitching, and the line closed ranks behind him. The cadence never broke. That was when I understood what endurance truly meant. It wasn't surviving the pain, it was forgetting it had ever been pain. In the weeks that followed, the lumen hum became my only companion. I began to map its pitch, its subtle changes. Sometimes it seemed almost melodic, like a distant chant. Other times it droned low and predatory, as if the vault itself were alive and listening. On the rare occasions when everything fell silent, when even the servitors paused between tasks, the absence of that sound filled me with panic. Without it, I felt untethered, unanchored in a void too vast to comprehend. By the time the final graphs were complete, I could no longer remember the shape of my old thoughts. My memories blurred, their edges softened by chemical fog. I couldn't recall my mother's face or the sound of rain on hive glass. Only the hum remained, steady, eternal, like a heartbeat older than mine. That was when they told us we would soon ascend to the surface for our next trial. The thought should have brought hope. Instead, it brought only dread. Because deep down, beneath the layers of engineered obedience, I still heard the echo of a boy's voice whispering from the recesses of my mind. My own voice fading. You wanted honor. You found extinction. The lumen hum swelled as if in reply. The first breath of the surface air nearly killed me. After months within the vault's sterile hum, the outside reeked of oil and smoke, of unfiltered atmosphere and distant ash. The training field stretched across a plateau of black stone, surrounded by fortress walls that reached toward a storm-thick sky. The horizon glowed faintly red, though whether from sunrise or furnace light I couldn't tell. The wind tasted metallic, and each gust seemed to whisper the same word into my ear: endure. We stood in formation, 30 aspirants reduced from hundreds. Our skin gleamed under the dim light, the marks of grafts still raw across our shoulders and necks. Above us, banners of the chapter's sigil swayed, the twin-headed Imperial Aquila glaring down like judgment incarnate. There was no room for awe here, only fear, sharpened into discipline. Our drillmaster was a veteran whose armor bore the faded scarring of countless campaigns. His name was Brother Sergeant Arctan, though to us he was only instructor. He spoke with the precision of a machine spirit, each syllable clipped, deliberate. You have been unmade, he began, his voice carrying across the field without amplification. Now you will learn what it means to serve. You will move when told. You will kill when told. You will die when told. There is no I, no self, no question. There is only the Emperor's will. The word struck me harder than any blow. After the transformation of flesh came the remolding of thought. We marched. We ran. We fought until the muscles in our augmented limbs screamed and the new bones in our legs creaked beneath the strain. When one of us faltered, Arctan didn't chastise, he observed. Then he called for a servitor to remove the failure. It was always the same, mechanical, merciless. Every mistake reduced the line by one. Our weapons were simple at first, weighted rods and mock bolters designed to teach form and rhythm rather than lethality. The first time I held one, the grip felt natural, as if my hands had been made for it. Perhaps they had. The black carapace linked our nerves to the weapon's machine spirit, each movement mirrored by faint electrical feedback across my skin. The sensation was both empowering and revolting. The days blurred into a pattern of command, repetition, exhaustion. We awoke before the lumen rose, assembled, drilled until blood darkened the dust beneath our boots, then knelt for instruction. The chaplain's litanies echoed through loud hailers mounted along the walls. Flesh yields. Steel remembers. Let your soul be the memory of his light. The phrase became our rhythm, our breath. Every motion synchronized to it until I could no longer tell where my will ended and theirs began. At night, the world shifted. We were not allowed to rest as humans do. The catalepsian node denied deep sleep, allowing our minds to slip only into brief meditative cycles. In those moments between wakefulness and trance, I could almost hear whispers in the static of my thoughts. Some said they were the echoes of the gene seed. Others claimed it was the Emperor's voice. I dared not decide. All I knew was that those whispers spoke of war. Endless, wholly consuming. Loran's absence haunted me. Sometimes, when fatigue blurred my vision, I imagined I saw him at the edge of the formation, his eyes hollow, his jaw twisted in silent accusation. The thought was irrational. Ghosts had no place in the Emperor's realm. Yet the memory persisted, flickering like the lumen hum that still resonated somewhere deep in my skull. We trained with live rounds after the third cycle. The mock bolters were replaced with sanctified weapons, each etched with the Aquila and blessed by a tech marine. The recoil shattered my shoulder the first time I fired, the power of the explosive shells more than flesh could absorb. Arcton corrected my stance with a single strike to the chest plate, his gauntlet cracking bone. "The weapon does not serve you," he growled. "You serve it. It carries his will." I remember the heat of that moment, the sting of pain merging with exhilaration. The bolter's roar echoed through my body like the hum had once done. A part of me, hidden and ashamed, thrilled at the violence. I understood then why some never returned from their first war unchanged. Power was intoxicating, and obedience made it pure. That night, as I cleaned the weapon, I caught my reflection in its polished casing. My face was harder now, my eyes devoid of anything that resembled the boy who'd entered the vault. I traced a finger along the Aquila etched into the weapon's side and felt something stir, a spark of reverence or perhaps surrender. Then, in the faint silence between drills, the hum returned. Softer this time, deeper, as if the vault's ghost had followed me to the surface. It filled my mind until I could no longer tell if it came from outside or within. When dawn came, the chaplain gathered us before a colossal statue of the Emperor, carved from stone darkened by centuries of ash. "You are the steel of his spirit," he intoned, his crozius raised high. "But remember, steel without purpose rusts. You are not chosen to survive. You are chosen to die correctly." As the wind whipped across the plateau, carrying the echo of his words into the void, I felt a strange calm settle over me. Death, after all we had endured, no longer felt like an ending. It felt like completion. Our days became ritual, not the kind whispered by priests, but the brutal litany of motion, sweat, and repetition. Each dawn began with the clang of the training bell, a sound that cut through sleep and silence alike. The moment it rang, we were expected to stand. No hesitation, no confusion, only immediate compliance. Those who lingered were struck down by the instructor's staff, not out of cruelty but correction. Hesitation, he said, was the seed of death. We ran until our augmented lungs burned cold, until the air thinned and the edges of vision darkened. The plateau's surface was pitted with craters from past bombardments, and the dust clung to our bare feet like ash. Sometimes, when exhaustion blurred the horizon, I thought I could see figures moving in that dust. Shapes of warriors passed, ghosts left behind by earlier generations of aspirants. They seemed to march in time with us, their forms flickering like the lumen hum had taken shape in the open air. When the running ended, the drills began. We sparred with blunt blades at first, the clang of steel against steel ringing across the field. Each strike tested the limits of our strength. Each parry demanded precision our bodies hadn't yet mastered. Pain was constant, but it no longer registered as suffering. The apothecary's serums dulled fear as efficiently as they dulled fatigue. Sometimes I wondered whether courage was even possible without fear. Brother Sergeant Arcton walked among us as we fought. He never raised his voice. He didn't need to. His presence alone was enough to shape us. When he corrected a form, it wasn't a reprimand, it was a revelation. "You fight with your arms," he told me once, catching my blade mid-swing with a gauntleted hand. "But the Emperor fights through your soul. Empty yourself. Become a vessel, not a weapon." His grip tightened just enough to make the point, then released. That night I practiced until the stars faded, trying to feel what he meant by emptiness. We were taught more than combat. The chaplains led us through catechisms carved into stone along the monastery's corridors. Each word was a reminder of our purpose. Suffer not the alien. Deny the witch. Destroy the heretic. We recited them until they wove themselves into our breathing, until they became the rhythm by which our hearts beat. Yet between those sacred words I still heard the hum. It wasn't the sterile sound of the vault now, it was deeper, richer, resonating through the ground itself. Sometimes when we knelt in prayer, I felt it vibrate through my palms pressed to the cold stone, as though the world beneath us were alive, murmuring a truth we weren't meant to hear. Food was scarce and joyless. Compressed protein blocks, nutrient gel, substances that fueled flesh but offered no comfort. I chewed because the body demanded it, not because I desired it. Hunger was another lesson in discipline, to eat without pleasure, to rest without peace, to live without self. There was a boy named Severin who spoke of his old life once. It was forbidden, of course, but he whispered it to me during latrine duty, when the wind drowned all sound. He said he'd been a scholar's apprentice, that he used to read by lumen light in a hive library until the black ships came. He told me he still dreamed of ink, of parchment, of the sound of pages turning. I said nothing. The next day his bunk was empty, and the chaplain announced that Severin had been relieved of his impurities. The phrase chilled me more than any punishment could. I didn't ask again. Weeks passed. Our bodies became instruments of violence, but our minds became quiet. The instructors began to smile, not in joy, but in approval. We were progressing. We could march for days without sleep, fight until the ground itself bled, and chant the Emperor's name until our throats were raw. I began to wonder whether that was faith or programming. Yet at night, when the storms rolled across the horizon and lightning illuminated the training field, I caught my reflection in the rain-slicked ground. For a heartbeat, I almost recognized myself again. Then the thunder came, and the sound buried the thought. The final test of the cycle came without warning. We were ordered to assemble at the cliff's edge overlooking the lower valley. The night was bitter, the air thin. Arcton stood before us, his armor glinting under the lightning. "Below," he said, pointing to the dark expanse, "is the quarry. You will descend, retrieve your assigned sigil from its heart, and return before dawn. Fail and you do not return at all." He didn't explain what awaited us in the quarry. He didn't need to. We could hear the distant sounds of creatures stirring in the dark, the guttural roars of things not entirely human. I gripped my blade tighter and felt the hum return, steady, rhythmic, like a voice reminding me that pain was temporary, obedience eternal. Then, with a silent nod, we leapt into the abyss. The descent tore the breath from my lungs. The wind screamed against the walls of the quarry, carrying with it the stench of decay and oil. We landed hard on the valley floor, boots striking stone that crumbled like old bone. The only light came from the dull crimson glow of emergency beacons embedded along the cliffs, fading, flickering like dying hearts. The others spread out silently, their movements precise, weapons drawn though we'd been told to bring none. We were to rely only on what we had become. The first sound was a growl, low and resonant, echoing from somewhere deep within the pit. Then another, closer, wet with hunger. Eyes flickered in the dark, too many, too low to belong to men. I remember the cold bloom of adrenaline as my secondary heart accelerated, flooding my body with oxygen, turning fear into clarity. The things that emerged were mutants, feral remnants of the mining colonies that once worked this place, their bodies twisted by radiation and the touch of the warp. Their flesh hung in strips, their mouths filled with broken metal teeth. Severin had once said that courage was not the absence of fear, but the choice to face it. I had thought the phrase sentimental then, but as the first of the creatures lunged, I understood. I met it head-on, my enhanced muscles surging, the crack of my elbow shattering its jaw. Blood sprayed across my chest, hot and thick, and for an instant the hum in my skull harmonized with the rhythm of combat. The vault, the pain, the indoctrination, all of it culminated here. The training had not been for endurance. It had been for this moment, instinct sharpened into perfection. We fought without formation, yet somehow as one. The years of drills had fused our movements into an unspoken unity. Blades flashed, bones broke, the air filled with screams and steam. I remember the sound of Brother Arcton's voice from the cliffs above, transmitted through Vox speakers. Steel does not flinch. Steel does not feel. Steel endures. His words fell like rain, mingling with the metallic scent of blood. I found my sigil at the base of a collapsed column, an iron disc bearing the aquila, half buried in mud. As I reached for it, a mutant struck from behind, claws scraping my back. The wound sealed almost instantly, Laraman cells knitting flesh faster than pain could follow. I turned and drove my blade into its skull, feeling bone give way under my hand. When it fell, the hum pulsed louder like approval. When the last of the creatures lay still, we stood amid the carnage, our breath steaming in the cold air. Only 20 remained. I remember counting automatically, not in grief but in order. The apothecaries would record the losses. We were not meant to. We climbed out of the quarry before dawn, our sigils held aloft. Arctan awaited us at the top, his armor reflecting the first light of morning. He regarded us without expression, then simply said, "You are beginning to understand." Back in the barracks, silence reigned. No one spoke of what had happened below. The chaplain's voice echoed through the Vox grills during purification rites. His tone calm, almost tender. Each drop of blood spilled as a verse in his song. Each life taken an offering. You are the litany of steel, sung in fire and flesh. We repeated the words until they became truth. That night, sleep refused to come. My mind replayed the battle again and again, but not as memory, more as echo. The hum had changed. It was no longer a background vibration, but a pulse that synchronized with my heart's. Every beat felt like a command, become more. I sat awake on my bunk, watching the others in restless half-sleep, their bodies twitching with residual adrenaline. We were bound now, not by choice or loyalty, but by transformation. We had crossed the point of return, and the realization came not with sorrow, but with quiet resignation. I found a moment of solitude at the edge of the plateau just before morning. The world stretched below, mountains scarred by fire, rivers turned to dust, the sky a shroud of storm clouds. I tried to recall the color of sunlight, the sound of laughter, anything from before. Nothing came. Only the hum. It was in everything now. The wind, the stone, the pulse of distant artillery from some unseen front. Perhaps it had always been there, waiting for those who had been altered enough to hear it. When dawn broke, Arcton assembled us once more. His shadow fell across us like a blade. "You have survived the quarry," he said. "But survival is not victory. Victory is obedience. Tomorrow you will be tested again, not by beasts but by yourselves." I didn't know what he meant then, but as we returned to our barracks I felt a slow dread take hold. The hum grew softer, almost compassionate, and that frightened me more than its roar. Compassion had no place in steel. The next day they brought out the cages. The cages were lowered from orbit at dawn. They came on grav chains, descending through the storm clouds like iron comets, their surfaces scorched by re-entry. When the first hit the ground, the shock wave rippled across the plateau and rattled our teeth. The air was thick with static, and the scent of ozone mingled with the acrid tang of promethium. We watched in silence as the tech marines approached, their mechadendrites hissing, their voices a chorus of binary prayers. They moved with reverence, unlocking each cage with the precision of ritual. Inside, the cargo twitched, Prisoners, heretics, mutants, deserters. Some bore the ragged remnants of Imperial uniforms. Others were unrecognizable shapes of twisted flesh and desperation. They had been promised absolution through death. We were to grant it. Brother Sergeant Arcton stood before us, his armor washed in the light of the burning dawn. "Today," he said, "you will prove the Emperor's gift was not wasted. You will cleanse these creatures, not because they deserve it, but because you must." His gaze swept over us, and for a heartbeat I felt seen, measured, weighed, and found uncertain. "Remember," he continued, "mercy is heresy." The gates of the cages clanged open. The prisoners stumbled out, blinking in the cold, their chains dragging through the dust. One of them, a man no older than I had been before the vault, looked up at us and tried to speak. The sound that came out was more sob than word. I saw the moment realization hit him, who we were, what this was. The terror in his eyes wasn't defiance. It was recognition. The chaplain raised his crozius high. "The Emperor protects," he intoned. We drew our blades. The first strike was clumsy. My hands hesitated for the briefest moment, caught between training and memory. The man lunged, not in attack but in panic, and I reacted. The blade entered his chest, the motion as natural as breathing. I felt the resistance of bone, the warmth of blood spilling down my arm. He looked at me as he fell, confusion rather than hatred in his expression, and I realized he was mouthing something. A prayer, maybe, or my name. But I had no name anymore. The battle or slaughter was over in minutes. The prisoners had no weapons, no chance. The ground ran red and the air filled with the sound of the dying. Around me, my brothers moved with mechanical precision, their faces blank, their strikes clean. Only when the last body fell did we stop. The silence that followed was immense. Arctan approached us slowly, his eyes sweeping across the carnage. "You have been baptized," he said. "Your blood and theirs are one in purpose. This is war. It will never feel holy, but it will always be righteous." Righteous. The word echoed in my head as the tech marines gathered the bodies for incineration. The heat of the pyres turned the horizon into a wavering mirage, and through that haze I thought I saw shapes. Figures moving beyond the flames, golden and vast. Custodians, perhaps. Spirits of warriors who had once stood in service to Terra itself. But when I blinked, the shapes were gone. Only smoke remained. That night, the hum returned in force. It filled every cell of my being, resonating with both hearts, both lungs, both lives. I felt as though the planet itself was speaking, its voice rising from the cracks in the earth. "You are no longer human. You are the Emperor's memory given flesh." Sleep refused me. I sat alone beside the barracks lumen grill, watching sparks drift from the incinerators like dying stars. My hands were steady, though they still bore the faint stain of blood. I tried to recall what guilt felt like, but it was like trying to remember warmth after a lifetime in the cold. The vault had unmade my body. The training had unmade my will. And now this fire had unmade my soul. At dawn we were ordered to deploy. The transports waited at the edge of the plateau, engines whining with the promise of descent. As I stepped aboard, the hum grew louder still, thrumming through the deck plates, through my chest, through the endless machinery of the Emperor's design. For the first time, I didn't resist it. I let it carry me. They said we were being sent to the outer hives where orcs had breached the defense lines. I didn't know the name of the world. It didn't matter. To the Imperium, every battlefield was the same, a place where faith was measured in blood. As the ship lifted into the storm, lightning flashing across the viewports, I looked down at the burning fields below and thought of the man I had killed. His face had already faded, but his eyes remained. They would stay with me for a very long time. The descent into the war zone felt like falling into the mouth of a god. The Thunderhawk's engines screamed through the upper atmosphere, turbulence battering the fuselage as we plunged into a sky the color of iron dust. I could feel every vibration through the mag plates beneath my boots, each one resonating in rhythm with the hum that had followed me since the vaults. Outside, lightning danced across the hull, painting our faces in flashes of white and violet. Inside, no one spoke. There was nothing left to say. Brother Sergeant Arcton stood near the forward bulkhead, his stance wide, hands clasped behind his back. Even here, surrounded by initiates who would die for him without hesitation, he was silent, a presence, not a man. When he finally turned, the red glow from the cabin lights caught the scar that ran from his temple to his jaw. "You will make planetfall on the outer Manufactorum Ridge," he said. "You will see the greenskins. You will learn their chaos, their stench, their stupidity. You will meet them in his name. And you will not break," the Vox crackled. 30 seconds. I gripped my bolter, our first true weapons now. Their machine spirits freshly awakened with the Tech Marine's rights. The weapon purred softly in my hands as if alive. Through the viewport I saw the ground rushing up to meet us, vast plains of fire and ruin. Manufactorum spires split open like cracked bones, rivers of molten metal snaking between the wrecks of tanks and broken habs. The scent of promethium seeped into the cabin, even through the sealed rebreathers. 5 seconds. The ramp dropped. Heat slammed into us along with sound. Deafening. Absolute. The roar of orc engines, the thunder of crude artillery, the bark of bolters answering from the trenches below. We leapt into the chaos, ceramite boots crushing ash as we hit the ground running. The world became noise and color, green hides and black smoke, the flash of muzzle fire against crimson haze. I remember the first orc I saw, massive, grinning, its mouth filled with iron and rot. It swung a cleaver big enough to split a man in half. I fired. The bolt round tore through its chest, detonating mid-cavity, painting the rocks behind it with steaming gore. For the first time since the induction vault, I felt alive. The others moved like extensions of a single will. Our formation was instinctive, our discipline absolute. The orcs were chaos made flesh, roaring, laughing, dying in droves, but we were the opposite. Order incarnate. Arcton moved ahead of us, his chainsword screaming, cutting arcs of light through the dust. Each kill was a word in a litany we didn't need to speak, but war isn't prayer. It's noise, and it breaks rhythm faster than faith. We advanced through the Manufactorum ruins, the ground shaking beneath the weight of explosions. I vaulted over a fallen pipe and nearly slipped on the slick of blood coating the metal. A voice crackled in my ear. "Arctans, push forward." No retreat. Then the line ahead of me broke. A shell struck, vaporizing 3 aspirants in a single flash of white. Their screams didn't even have time to form. I threw myself behind cover, ears ringing, vision full of static. My secondary heart stuttered, then steadied, pumping calm through the flood of adrenaline. I rose. An orc charged through the smoke, its eyes glowing with hatred and hunger. I fired again and again until my bolter clicked dry. It didn't stop. It crashed into me, its weight driving me to the ground. The stench of it, sweat, blood, oil, filled my lungs. I jammed my combat knife beneath its jaw and drove upward with all my strength. Bone cracked, blood spattered my faceplate, and the creature went still. I shoved it aside and stood gasping, the hum roaring in my skull like a storm. By the time the battle ended, the Manufactorum was nothing but ruin. The orcs lay in heaps, some still twitching, others silent. We had lost nearly half our number. The air shimmered with heat and death. Arcton stood among the bodies, his armor blackened by soot, his eyes bright behind his helm lenses. "You have seen war," he said quietly. "You will see it again. It will never end. Accept this, and you will endure." We gathered the fallen and burned them according to the rites. The flames turned the air golden for a moment like false dawn. As I watched, the hum reached a new pitch, so high it bordered on pain. And yet within it I heard something strange. Not command, not duty, but a question. "Why do you still remember?" I didn't know the answer. I wasn't sure I wanted one. That night, as we made camp among the ruins, I cleaned my armor and weapons by lumen light. The sky above was black, pierced by distant fire from orbital strikes. The world had gone silent but for the hum, the same sound that had followed me from the vaults through the training fields into the war. It was constant, eternal. For the first time, I wondered if it was the Emperor at all, or if it was simply what was left of me, echoing inside the shell of someone who used to be human. We stayed on that world for what must have been weeks, though time had lost all meaning. Every dawn brought more smoke, more ash, more enemies to kill. The manufactorum fields became a graveyard of metal and flesh. The sky never cleared. Even the sun seemed afraid to show itself. We slept in the ruins, ate ration paste in silence, and moved at the sound of Arctan's vox call like clockwork servitors. Somewhere along the line I stopped hearing individual voices among us. Every word, every command, every grunt of exertion seemed to blend into one continuous sound. The hum again, omnipresent and alive, as though the very war itself was breathing through us. The orcs never stopped coming. It didn't matter how many we cut down. For every one that fell, 2 more crawled from the smog. The air reeked of burning oil and charred meat, a stench that clung to the back of the throat until even the scent of one's own blood felt familiar. The apothecaries moved among us like ghosts, administering stims and pain inhibitors, patching holes in armor and flesh alike. Their white armor was never clean for long. At night I sometimes heard the wounded murmuring prayers through the vox net, not to the Emperor, but to the machine god, to the spirits of their weapons, to the brothers they'd lost. It was blasphemy, but no one corrected them. The chaplain said nothing. Faith in those moments was measured by endurance, not purity. One evening, after a particularly brutal engagement near the collapsed plasma furnaces, Arctan ordered us to hold position while the tech marines recalibrated the orbital targeting relays. The air shimmered with residual energy from the plasma spill, painting the ruins in eerie green light. I stood guard by the perimeter, bolter in hand, scanning the horizon for movement. That was when I saw it. Movement that wasn't orc nor human. Something tall, impossibly thin, gliding through the fog between the broken manufactorum spires. I blinked and it was gone. When I mentioned it to the apothecary, he merely frowned. The neural rewiring from your black carapace may cause perceptions, he said. Ignore them. Focus on the task, but I couldn't ignore it. That night the hum changed pitch again. It no longer pulsed like a heart, but flowed like a current, pulling at my thoughts. I dreamt of light, blinding gold, endless. Not the Emperor's light, not quite. Something colder, watching, judging. I awoke drenched in sweat, though my body no longer produced much of it. My secondary heart was racing, my primary calm. The contradiction frightened me more than any nightmare could.